Hi everyone, I'm Justin with Kelvin Education, and we recently recorded a webinar with Christine Flok from Twin Rivers Unified School District, in which she shares how they use Kelvin in their schools and how it helps with their MTSS program and all of the other benefits that Kelvin has. We thought we'd share this with you. We hope you enjoy.
Yep, so my name is Christine Flok. I'm the coordinator of MTSS and interventions in Twin Rivers. And I've been working in education for about 12 years at this point, and I've done a lot. I started out working in an AmeriCorps position in San Francisco and never thought I would work in education, but there I was just trying to figure out San Francisco and got a job. So that was that. And then I fell in love with those kids and I got my credential. But I did a lot of after school work before that. After I got my credential, I taught 3rd, 5th, 6th grade. Those are my homies. And then I became a specialist in this same MTSS program, which I'll talk about what that looks like in Twin Rivers. And then I became the coordinator. So what's nice about this, about my trajectory, was that I had a lot of different experiences with a lot of different systems, which is what my job does, really manages systems in our district. And so go ahead and click to the next slide. So I work with behavior, academic, and social emotional learning systems. And I'm sure you've seen the MTSS triangle at some point with tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. And all of these, we have a pretty good understanding in Twin Rivers at this point that these work hand in hand. They work next to each other. They work with each other. And so if there's a couple more clicks on this one, but I'll talk through tier 1, 2, and 3. As you know, that tier 1 is what all students get. Tier 2, we're looking at smaller group interventions for kids. And then tier 3, we're looking more individualized, more intense interventions for students, smaller groups of kids, sometimes few groups of kids. Twin Rivers has a population of about 25,000 students, 88% of them free and reduced lunch, pretty diverse group. 1 in 4 students are a language learner. We have a big refugee population. We have in full transparency, we have a mix of rural and urban poverty. So it's very diverse. It has a lot of needs on the behavior, academic, and social emotional front. If you go ahead and click through that one more time, you can see what I just explained, but where Kelvin fits in is on our screener side to start. So we used the pulse as Kelvin, you heard the team talk about Kelvin pulses and how those go out, little surveys. I wasn't sure if I heard them say that those survey questions, they're really well researched questions that you can dig into different frameworks that range social emotional learning. For us, we use the CASTLE framework. So we took some of the biggest pieces and made it our universal screener, which is a big part of MTSS. In Twin Rivers for behavior, we use our PBIS system as a screener. For academics, ELA and math, we use iReady and IXL. For SEL, we use Kelvin. So that's a big piece of the MTSS system. And then from there, we also use Kelvin amongst some other pieces for small group interventions and individualized interventions. But even more so on the tier 1 front, we give access to all students. We give all students access to the Kelvin larger group interventions in community circles. So that's one of our big tier 1 pieces. So that's how we get access to everyone in that tier 1 space. And I'm going to talk about that screener in more detail as we go. So a couple more clicks to get through this. So one thing that we've learned over the years, because we've been working with Kelvin, I think for 3 years at this point, I could be wrong, so nearly from the start of Kelvin implementing their system. What we've learned, because I could talk the timeline of from the beginning till now, but I'm more going to talk about now and where we are, because I think that's more refined and better to think. moving forward, learn from somebody else who's maybe made some mistakes along the way. So our teams in Twin Rivers were really important. We already had systems going for academics and for behavior, PBIS, if anyone knows it, training tier 1 teams, training tier 2 teams, training tier 3 teams after fidelity implementation, it's like launch, but those teams are at sites. And so if you could go ahead and click once for the content here. So we knew that we needed to have a lot of different teams from the district level down. And this is what we learned through some of our other system implementations was we had a site team, but we never, for years, I think it took us 5 or 6 years, we didn't have a district level team making district level decisions with the district handbook until 5 or 6 years into our earlier implementation. So once Kelvin came, we knew we needed this kind of from the jump. So we have a district leadership team. It's our SEL, DLT. Anybody who knows MTSS knows that there's lots of acronyms. So our social emotional learning district leadership team, we design the screener and then we analyze results on the big system level. And I'll talk about what we do with the data in a later slides. We also have an MTSS SEL team. So I have a team of, they'll kill me that I can't remember, 19 specialists who support Twin Rivers schools in their implementation of these 3 big systems on academics, behavior, and social emotional learning. And within that team, I have a social emotional learning team, call it a focus group. They support site teams and they distribute resources. So that helps me and the district leadership team distribute information as necessary. Then we also rely on 2 other teams. And this helps for anyone who's considering putting this out to a bigger district, smaller district even, making at this point in the world, making anything that you're implementing part of what you're already doing is key, because educators have I recently heard this phrase, compassion satisfaction, which is like what keeps educators going. It's like, you're in the classroom and you're like, yeah, this feels so good. And then there's this other side, which is compassion fatigue. And it's when you're tired from that. Every educator experiences it and there's usually a balance. But right now there's this big influx or an overwhelming on one side of the compassion fatigue. So if you're adding anything else in, I highly encourage embedding it into what's already happening. And for us, earlier on, we recognized that, but this is before COVID even, we have site-based instructional leadership teams and we have site-based PBIS teams, and SEL and behavior go hand in hand. So that's an easy one on the PBIS front. They look at data on the site level and make decisions, because what happens is we get data on the district level. So I can see all 54 school sites and what's happening, and we allocate resources, which I'll talk about. I can see who needs support and where, and that's where specialists go. And then what individual site teams can see is digging deeper into their data, what they need to do specifically with families, with students, with kids. So it really provides this system of support around SEL. Okay, so what is this screener that we're talking about here? So click in. So that SEL DLT, we pick about 10 to 20 questions for students, staff, and families, and those are directly based on the CASTLE framework. So you do have to do some digging to pull out exactly which questions you want to make this this screener. But again, they're very well researched questions, so it makes you feel. For me, I'm a fidelity person, and I've recently heard some people calling it the F word in education. So I'm a fidelity person, but so if that speaks to anyone's language, then there you go. But the 10 to 20 is because we differentiate the screener for K2, 3-6, and 7-12. So on the K2 range, you give them about 10 questions. And then the 3-6, 7-12, we can go up to 20. And so staff and families, they also get their own screener for questions that we're asking within the same domains that we're zooming in on, again, in that CASTLE framework. We call it a screener because we're doing this beginning, middle, end of the year, which aligns with our, not at the same time period, but it aligns in the sense that we use the same system for iReady and for IXL for our reading and math screeners. And doing that, even though it's a different program, if you will, having a similar system, same thing, helps with that compassion fatigue that we're feeling overwhelmed. If you can embed something into what's already happening, or it's a practice that they're already used to, it alleviates a lot of that for educators, what we found. And then that team does some data analysis. And what we do is, after that screener comes in, you saw that heat map, we look at the highest areas of need. So we're not looking at individual school sites and who needs the most at that point. Right there, we're looking at the domains, and we make connections with different district departments to be able to provide additional services. And then those site teams focus their interventions a little more necessary as they need to. I'm going to talk about data and what that a partnership looks like in a little bit, but I want you to understand that big level data versus site level data. They're different, and it's been a really nice way for us to say that we really do speak to equitably allocating resources and providing supports as needed. So it's not just like, oh, in general, we're always going to do this. Every screener, it changes, which is a really cool way to break down silos, as they say. Okay, so go ahead and click into that. So the results are reported out, and this helps our system of support. To our district runs on, we have executives, we have directors, executives, and then we have like superintendents and board members, and we report out to each of those, and that really helps to only recognize the work that's happening, but to communicate the clarity of the system across the board. I'm sure that you've experienced somewhere where like the right person says the right thing, and then you're like bought into it, and so when everyone's kind of speaking the same language, it's like, well, who can you not listen to, you know? So so we communicate that triannually after each one of the big screeners, so they know what's happening and really why this is important, because our superintendent gets the screener, families get the screener, and if we're not communicating our moves, then the next time that comes out, they're probably not going to take it. So that's been something that we've learned over the years in terms of surveys, and the participation that we get on those is making sure everyone's speaking the same language. Okay, so this is a little bit of the data analysis that we saw and what people did. So I'm going to speak through each of these. So the first box there talks about the district leadership team learning that on the big screener, when we saw the domain showing us that families didn't know the supports around mental health that were provided, we collaborated with our family community engagement team, which is the department that relays information to families, does training for families. And we did a training on how to navigate through the website, but we, as in Twin Rivers, somebody else, not me, redesigned the website to make it more easily navigatable, if that's a word. And so then we communicated that to families. So that was a direct action from what we got from the screener. Looking at students on the 7-12, so again, whole district data, 7-12 showed a lack of management skills and completing assignments on time. They were like, we don't care about completing assignments on time. All of our high schools, we got all our principals together and we talked to them about this, and they decided to implement something called lag time, which is where students looked at their grades every weekly. So they have a time on Wednesday where they, in their curriculum support, what do they call it? Advisory period, they look at their grades. That's just one intervention that was put into place from the screener. Site level teams saw a recognition, saw that they needed to recognize students for positive behavior. This came from families saying, we don't get any recognition for our students when they do something good. You guys are always calling when somebody is doing something bad. So executive cabinet, the people over all of our principals, recommended that sites make 2 phone calls a week that were positive. And we started tracking that in our intervention, with my intervention specialist. And then on the smaller range students K-12, they showed a need for peer-to-peer connectedness. So across the board, we set a hiring practice into hiring people who were supporting playground, activities, trying to teach kids how to play with each other and make that move there. So it's changed. It's given information to a lot, from hiring to professional development to some of the systems that we input at the school sites. But I wanted to speak to that more on the bigger data, because it's really, I think it's easier to look on the site data and see like, oh, my kids are saying that they lack mindfulness skills. Great. In my classroom, I'm going to input some of that stuff, and there's resources for that. You can really look through the Kelvin toolbox and just grab interventions or lesson plans, and you just pull up and do them. But as a principal, or even as a district administrator, trying to figure out how you fit into that piece is a little trickier. So I really wanted to like lay into that, just so you kind of can see how all the pieces could fit together in a bigger district, and when you have those teams supporting. One of the last things I wanted to talk about was how we document this, because all of these are interventions, and we have something called our student support plan. We input all of our information when students are outside of the tier 1. So tier 1, all students get this thing. All students get the Kelvin screener, and they all get a level of tier 1 social emotional learning. When kids are showing that they need more, that's when we start documenting these pieces. And so Kelvin lessons, Kelvin curriculum in, what would I say, in like counseling groups or in social emotional groups, or even individual like check in, check out stuff that's happening. We document that all in our intervention tracking. We use Aries, but we input all of that into that system. And so it's been a nice piece, because I think at this point, you know, educators are like, they might, without this specific training, might not know what to do when and for how long. And this provided a really great resource for like, here it is, you know, you can grab that, you can do a couple lessons within this domain over a couple of weeks, track how it goes with that student, and input that into the system. So it's fit into our intervention tracking system as well. So we still have stuff to do. We are actually putting Ruler in to our tier 1, and I'm not plugging Ruler right now, but it's a tier 1 framework. And what we're doing is using Kelvin within our Ruler implementation to check and see how that's going. So our screener is going to modify a little differently. So instead of just asking these Castle framework questions, we're actually going to be asking some more questions around our Ruler implementation, and not like, hey, do you know Ruler's being implemented? But one piece of it is like the mood meter, which allows students to communicate through their emotions. And so asking a question as we look through some of those domained questions, that looks more like, do you have a tool that you can use to communicate how you feel and your energy level? We're going to be using Kelvin within our Ruler implementation to track that F word, fidelity, and also embedding it into our, if anyone does PBIS again, there are walkthroughs that happen about spring of every year. And we're also going to embed some of our looking at Kelvin data with the Ruler implementation in our PBIS walkthroughs as well. So again, trying to fit all these pieces together so people don't feel that there's something extra, as much as it's just refining our pieces in that like cycle of continuous improvement. So that's about it.